The evening sun dipped behind the hills of Enugu, casting a soft orange glow on the thatched roof of a small village. Chike sat on a wooden bench outside their mud house, his face hardened with a mix of worry and determination. Behind him, his younger brother Emeka fiddled with a stick, his mind far away from the tension that hung in the air. Their father had passed away 2 years earlier, leaving their mother to care for them with very little. Money was scarce, and food was often a struggle. Now, as both boys stood at the crossroads of education, the weight of survival pressed heavier than ever. Their mother, Mama Nkechi, had gathered them that morning with tears in her eyes. "My son," she had said, her voice trembling, "I can only afford to send one of you to secondary school. We must decide." The silence that followed was unbearable. Chike was the elder, hardworking and intelligent, always topping his class. But Emeka, though younger, had a fiery ambition in his eyes and spoke endlessly of becoming a lawyer one day. That night, while Emeka slept, Chike tossed on his raffia mat thinking of their future. He knew what his heart wanted, to continue his studies, to make something of himself, but he also knew what his conscience demanded. Finally, as the first cock crowed, he made his decision. The next morning, he turned to his mother, his voice steady despite the pain inside him. "Mama, let Emeka go. I will stay behind and work. He is younger. His future is brighter." His mother's eyes welled with tears, and she clasped his hands tightly. Emeka, wide-eyed and shocked, stammered, "But Chike, what about your dreams?" Chike forced a smile, though it cut him deeply. "My dream," he said softly, "is to see you succeed. Promise me, Emeka, when you become the man I know you can be, you will not forget me." Emeka nodded fervently, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I promise, brother. I will never forget you." But promises, as time will reveal, are always not kept. The days that followed marked the beginning of a new life for Chike. While Emeka packed his few belongings and prepared for school, Chike rose before dawn to join men in the village square looking for labor. He carried bricks at construction sites, fetched water for wealthier households, and sometimes worked in the fields under the scorching sun. Each evening, he returned home with aching muscles, but with a sense of quiet satisfaction. When Emeka came back during holidays, dressed in his neat school uniform, Chike's chest swelled with pride. He would ask questions about what Emeka was learning, eager to live through his brother's progress. "You are doing well, Emeka," he would ask, his eyes searching for reassurance. "Yes, Chike," Emeka would answer, smiling. "One day, I will make you proud. One day, you won't have to suffer anymore." Chike held onto those words as though they were scriptures. But the burden was heavy. Often, he skipped meals so that their mother and Emeka could eat. His clothes became worn and patched, and his youthful dreams slowly faded under the weight of responsibility. Villagers whispered about his sacrifice, some praising his selflessness, others shaking their heads, wondering why such a bright boy would throw away his chance. Still, Chike never wavered. At night, as he lay on his mat, his body sore from labor, he whispered prayers to God. "Let Emeka succeed where I could not. Let him rise high, so that my sacrifice will not be in vain." Unbeknownst to him, the seed of betrayal were already being planted, for as Emeka thrived in the world of books and ambition, his memory of that sacred promise began to blur with each passing day. The first year passed quickly. Emeka returned from school during the long holiday, taller, sharper, with a confidence that made his mother beam with pride. He wore his neatly pressed uniform even when he didn't need to, strutting round the village like a young rooster. Chike, standing in his sweat-stained shirt, welcomed him with open arms. He had saved some of his meager earnings to buy Emeka a pair of sandals, though his own shoes were worn to the sole. When he handed them over, Emeka's eyes lit up. "Brother, you shouldn't have spent your money," Emeka exclaimed, though he clutched the sandals tightly. Chike smiled faintly. "Your feet must not touch the ground carelessly. You are walking towards a future I never had." The holidays, however, were bittersweet. When Mama Nkechi paraded Emeka proudly before neighbors, praising his fine handwriting and perfect recitations, Chike remained in the background. Some villagers praised him openly. "Chike, you're a good son. You sacrifice much." But others whispered more cruelly, "He is a fool. He gave up his chance for a boy who might never remember him." Chike ignored the gossip. He found joy in listening to Emeka's school stories at night by the fireside. Emeka would speak of debates, competitions, and the teachers who predicted he would go far. Chike's chest would swell with pride, imagining his brother one day as a lawyer in a big city. Yet, beneath the pride, a pang of longing gnawed at him. Each time Emeka read aloud from the textbooks, Chike felt the emptiness of his own lost dream. Sometimes, when no one was looking, he borrowed Emeka's books and stumbled over the words, determined to keep his mind alive. But Emeka, caught up in his new world, didn't notice. To him, his brother's sacrifice was already becoming part of the background noise of his life. As months turned into years, the burden on Chike's shoulder grew heavier. He worked harder than ever, sometimes traveling to neighboring towns for construction jobs that paid slightly more. His hands became calloused, his back bent, his face lined long before his time. Emeka, meanwhile, flourished. Letters from school were filled with tales of his brilliance. He was excelling in debates, topping his class, and even making friends with children from wealthier families. Mama Emeka would read the letters aloud with trembling joy, her pride in her younger son overflowing. "Emeka will change our destiny," she often said, smiling at Chike. "Your sacrifice will not be in vain." Chike forced a smile, but in his heart, the strain was beginning to weigh him down. At night, when the house was quiet, he lay awake wondering about his own future. Would he always remain the village laborer? Would his sacrifice ever truly pay off? Sometimes he looked at Emeka and wondered if his brother understood the depth of what had been given up for him. Emeka was still polite, still respectful, but his world was expanding beyond the walls of their village. He spoke less of his promise, less of Chike's sacrifice, and more of the life he imagined for himself in the city. The villagers noticed. Some began to whisper again. "Emeka will forget him," they said. "When the boy makes it, he will not look back." Chike silenced such thoughts, clutching onto the memory of Emeka's childhood promise. But deep down, a quiet fear grew. A fear that one day, when his brother stood tall in success, Chike would be left in the shadows, forgotten, and unknown to him. That fear would prove itself one day. The day Emeka finished his secondary school examinations, the village rejoiced, as if a festival had arrived. The news spread quickly. Emeka had graduated among the top of his class. Women congratulated Mama Nkechi in the market, and men nodded with respect whenever they passed Chike on the road. At home, Emeka strutted around, brimming with excitement about his future. "Brother, just wait. When I enter the university, life will change for all of us. You will no longer work with your hands. I will take care of you." Chike's heart swelled. He sat with Emeka under the mango tree, listening to his dreams. Emeka spoke of studying law, of working in the city, of building a fine house for their mother. For a moment, all Chike's worries faded. His sacrifices had not been in vain. His brother still remembered. But as weeks passed, reality crept in. University required money far beyond what Chike had imagined. Admissions letters arrived with fees that could have bought goats, land, and enough food to last a year. Mama Nkechi wept as she held the paper, her joy swallowed by fear. Chike, she whispered, how can we reach such money? This dream may slip away. Chike clenched his fists. He looked at Emeka, whose eager eyes pleaded silently with him, and made a decision. He sold his father's last parcel of land, the only inheritance he had left. With the money, Emeka's admission was secured. That night, Chike lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He felt pride, yes, but also a sharp pain. He had given up everything: education, land, inheritance for his own brother. All he had left was his body and his labor. He consoled himself with one thought: Emeka will rise, and when he does, he will lift me too. University life transformed Emeka. When he returned home from his first holiday, he was barely recognizable. He wore crisp shirt, spoke with polished English, and carried himself with an air of superiority. His old friends in the village stared at him with envy, while the elders praised him as the pride of their community. Mama Nkechi nearly burst with joy, parading him before relatives as if he were a trophy. Chike stood at the edge of every gathering, smiling quietly. Though his heart ached with mixed emotion, he was proud, yes, but he also noticed something unsettling. Emeka rarely sat with him anymore, rarely sought his advice or shared his secrets as he once did. One evening, Chike approached him. Emeka, how are your studies? Do you still remember the promise you made to me that day under the mango tree? Emeka laughed lightly, waving his hand. Brother, don't worry. All is well. When I graduate, everything will change. His words were smooth, but his eyes did not miss Chike's. The villagers began to whisper again. Some said Emeka had outgrown his family, that the city had swallowed him. Others pitied Chike, who had bent his back daily under the sun, while his brother walked in polished shoes. Chike silenced the whispers with hope, but in his heart, he felt a widening distance, as if the bond between him and Chike was thinning, thread by thread, and he could not shake the fear that one day the thread would snap completely. The years passed quickly, and Emeka's brilliance at the university became the talk of their community. His name was often mentioned in letters that reached home, scholarships, debates, student union activities. Mama Nkechi would dance each time a letter arrived, holding it to her chest as if it was a treasure. Chike, however, noticed something troubling. Emeka wrote less and less about home. When he did mention his family, it was brief, almost careless. The affectionate brother Chike, my backbone, was replaced with a simple, hope you are fine. One holiday, Emeka came home with a friend from the city, a boy from a wealthy family. They spoke loudly in English, speaking about things Chike could barely understand. When Chike approached, Emeka introduced him quickly. This is my elder brother. Nothing more. No proud mention of sacrifice, no acknowledgement of the price that had been paid. That night, Chike sat by the fire, staring into the flames. He remembered the early days, when Emeka had clung to him, promising never to forget. Now Emeka moved like a stranger, under the same roof. Mama Nkechi noticed too, but she silenced her worry. Chike, don't read too much into it. He is still young. When he finishes school, he will change everything for us. Chike nodded silently, but his heart whispered a different truth. Gratitude was fading, and soon it might completely vanish. It was during Emeka's final year that the first betrayal surfaced. Chike had fallen ill, a fever that left him bedridden for days. Unable to walk, he worried about feeding his mother and keeping the house running. Words reached Emeka through a cousin who studied in the same city. Chike expected his brother to come home, or at least send money, but weeks passed and nothing came. Instead, Emeka sent a short letter. Brother, I'm preparing for my final exams. I cannot be distracted. Take care of yourself. The words cut deeper than the fever itself. Chike had once sold his inheritance for Emeka's education. Yet now, in this time of need, Emeka offered nothing but empty lines. Villagers began to murmur openly, "Is this how gratitude dies?" The boy had forgotten the one who carried him. Chike, weakened but defiant, defended his brother. He is busy with his exams. When he succeeds, all of this will change. But inside, he felt the sting of betrayal. The thread of their bond, once stretched thin, was beginning to fray. And deep within Chike's heart, a seed of bitterness was planted. A seed that would one day grow into something darker than he could ever imagine. The news came like a trumpet blast. Emeka had graduated from the university with top honors. The whole village buzzed with excitement. Women carried baskets of kola nuts and palm wine to Mama Nkechi's house, singing her praises for raising such a son. Men slapped Chike on the back, congratulating him as though the glory was his own. On the day of the graduation, Chike traveled to the city for the first time in years. He arrived wearing his best shirt, though it was patched at the elbow, and shoes whose soles were nearly worn out. When he reached the ceremony, he stood at the back of the crowd, searching eagerly for his brother. Then he saw him, Emeka dressed in his graduation gown, cap tilted proudly, shaking hands with professors and smiling for photographs. For a moment, Chike's chest filled with pride. Tears welled in his eyes as he whispered, "That is my brother. That is the future I worked for." But something unexpected pierced that joy. When Emeka's wealthy friends and classmates gathered to take pictures, Chike approached slowly, ready to stand by his side. Emeka glanced at him briefly, then turned away. "Not now, brother," he muttered under his breath, almost embarrassed. "I'll find you later." Chike froze, the sting sharper than a whip. He stepped back, blending into the crowd, his heart breaking in silence. That night, while others celebrated Emeka's success, Chike walked alone through the city streets, feeling like a shadow to his brother's rising sun. When Emeka returned to the village as a graduate, he was treated like royalty. Villagers lined the path singing his name. Children ran after him shouting, "Graduate, graduate." He walked with a swagger, carrying himself like a man destined for greatness. Mama Nkechi shed tears of joy, holding her son as though he were a king returning from battle. "My son, you will bring honor to this family. You will bring wealth. You will bring freedom." But in the corner of the yard, Chike stood silently. He smiled faintly, but his heart was heavy. He had dreamed of this moment for years, yet something was missing. He expected acknowledgement, gratitude, even a simple word of appreciation. But Emeka spoke little of his brother. Instead, he spoke of job opportunities, city life, and the friends who promised to connect him to powerful men. That evening, Chike tried to speak with Emeka. "Emeka, now that you are done, things will be better for us. We can rebuild. Perhaps I too can start something with your help." Emeka's response was cold, almost dismissive. "Brother, I must first secure myself before thinking of others. These things take time." Chike felt his stomach twist. He had given everything, education, inheritance, health, for this very day. And yet, in Emeka's eyes, his sacrifice seemed like a forgotten story. In that moment, Chike realized the whispers of the villagers had not been lies. His brother was slipping away, and the bond they once shared was beginning to shatter. Not long after his graduation, Emeka received a letter that changed everything. He had secured a job in the city. It wasn't just any job. It was with a reputable law firm, the kind of place that could open doors to wealth and influence.
The entire village buzz with pride. Mama Nkechi nearly collapsed from joy, while neighbors praised her endlessly. "Your son will build you a mansion," they sang. "He will change the name of your family forever." Chike smiled politely, but his heart was restless. On the morning Emeka prepared to leave for the city, Chike pulled him aside. "Brother, remember where you started. Remember the promise. Don't let the city take your heart away." Emeka, already dressed in a fine shirt gifted by a wealthy friend, brushed him off lightly. "Chike, stop worrying. Everything will be fine. Just wait, you will see." But when Emeka arrived in the city, the transformation was swift. He quickly blended into the world of polished shoes, expensive wine, and loud laughter at nightclubs. He wrote fewer letters home. When he did, they were short, often speaking only of his achievements and new friends. One day, Mama Nkechi asked Chike, "Has Emeka sent you anything? Even small money to ease your burdens?" Chike shook his head, forcing a smile. "He's just starting, Mama. Let us give him time." But at night, he lay awake, his body aching from the day's labor, wondering if his brother had remembered the man who gave him everything. Months passed, and while Emeka's star shone brighter in the city, life in the village grew heavier for Chike. The roof of their old house leaked during the rains. The farm barely yielded enough to eat, and his clothes were patched until they resembled rags. Yet, no word came from Emeka. Finally, one evening, word reached the village. Emeka had been seen driving in a wealthy man's car, dressed in suits finer than anything their village people had ever owned. The villagers gathered round Mama Nkechi, praising her endlessly, but as they sang, Chike's heart burned. Later that night, as he sat outside the moonlight, Chike whispered to himself, "Does he even remember the land I sowed? The night I starved? The fever I endured while he studied?" His fist clenched, nail digging into his skin. Then came the cruelest blow. A cousin who lived in the city returned to the village for burial. He sat with Chike and said casually, "Brother, I saw Emeka last week. He was at a party laughing with his friends. They asked who he was, and he said he was from the city. He didn't even mention you or this village." Chike's chest tightened, as if a rope had been tied around his lungs. The promise under the mango tree, gone. The gratitude he once believed in, vanished like smoke. For the first time, a dangerous thought crept into his mind. Perhaps I was a fool. Perhaps I gave away my life for nothing. And in that deep moment of bitterness, the bond of brotherhood cracked further, so wide that it might never heal. The annual New Yam Festival arrived, a time when the village brimmed with colors, music and laughter. Dancers swayed to the rhythm of the drums, masquerades chased children through the dusty streets, and the aroma of roasted yam and palm oil filled the air. But for Chike, the festival carried a different weight. It was always the season when families gathered, showing pride in their children who had made it in the cities. As Chike walked through the crowd, he felt invisible. People were whispering again. Old men sitting under the iroko tree spoke in hushed tone about how his younger brother had risen to fame and fortune. Yet, Chike still lived in the same mud-walled house, wearing his patched clothes. Even the children mocked him, pointing out how Emeka never visited the village anymore. Chike forced a smile, hiding the sting. He had grown used to whispers, but tonight they pierced deeper. It wasn't just the gossip, it was the silence. Emeka's absence had become louder than drums. Once, people had praised Chike for his sacrifice. Now, they mocked him for his naivety. Later that evening, the village elders called a meeting in the square. Chike stood at the back listening. One elder asked, "Where is Emeka, the great son of our land? Does he not remember where his umbilical cord was buried?" The question hung in the air like a smoke. Chike felt shame boiling in his chest. For years, He had defended his brother, making excuses for his absence. But tonight, surrounded by laughter, music, and stories of other sons who came home bearing gifts, he realized Emeka's silence had become a wound the whole village could see. Chike walked home with heavy steps, the drums fading behind him. For the first time, he whispered aloud, "Maybe Ngozi was right. Maybe Emeka had truly forgotten." Weeks after the festival, Chike sat outside under the moonlight, staring at the path that led to the postman's bicycle bell. Every sound of wheels against gravel made his heart leap, hoping a letter from Emeka would finally arrive. But the bell never rang for him. One night, as he sat in that expected silence, Mama Ifoma, a widow from the next compound, walked over with her wrapper tied tightly around her waist. She placed a hand on Chike's shoulder and said, "You cannot keep waiting on shadows, my son. If your brother had forgotten, then it is time you remembered yourself." Her words sank into him like cold water. Chike realized how much of his life had been paused, waiting for a promise to be fulfilled. He remembered the long nights of laboring on the farm, the hunger he endured, and the dreams he abandoned just to make sure Emeka got to school. But now, even after all the sacrifice, there was nothing. No letter, no visit, no sign of gratitude. One evening, the postman finally did arrive, carrying a stack of letters. Chike's heart raced, his palms sweating, but as the man shuffled through the pile, he shook his head. "Nothing for you today, Chike." It felt like the final blow. That night, unable to sleep, Chike reached for the old box under his bed. Inside were all the letters Emeka once sent during his school days, each one filled with gratitude, promises, and brotherly affection. Chike read them by the dim flame of his lantern, tears rolling down his eyes. He clutched one letter tightly, the one where Emeka had written, "Brother, I owe you my life. I will never forget." But as the candle melted into darkness, Chike realized the truth had been avoiding. Sometimes promises are as fragile as paper, and sometimes they are never meant to be kept. The decision weighed on Chike for nights. He couldn't bear the whispers in the village anymore, nor the constant waiting for a letter that would never come. One morning, before the first cock crowed, he rose, packed his small bag with 2 shirts, his old pair of sandals, and the letters Emeka once sent. He locked his mud house with a stick wedged in the doorframe and whispered a prayer into the rising dawn. "God, if I don't find answers today, let me at least find peace." The journey to the city was long and dusty. Chike sat in the back of an overcrowded bus squeezed between a woman carrying chickens and a trader with a bag of dried fish. The road stretched endlessly, with potholes that jolted his tired body. But Chike's mind was sharper than ever. Every bump in the road reminded him of the sacrifices he had made, the yams he sowed, the dreams he buried, just so Emeka could have a chance. When the bus finally rolled into the bustling city, Chike's eyes widened. Tall buildings stretched into the sky. People rushed past each other, and the air was filled with the sound of honking cars and shouting traders. He clutched his bag tightly, overwhelmed but determined. He had only one address, an old hostel where Emeka once lived during his early years at the university. With shaky steps, Chike made his way there. But when he arrived, the gatekeeper laughed bitterly. "That boy? He hasn't been here in years. He lived in one of those big estates now, driving cars you and I will never touch." The words cut like a blade. Chike realized then that Emeka had climbed so high that he no longer looked down. Still, he was determined. He asked for directions to the estate, and though people eyed his ragged clothes suspiciously, they pointed him towards the road of wealth. That night, Chike sat outside a small kiosk, too poor to afford a room. He sipped warm water from a nylon sachet and whispered to himself, "Tomorrow I will see him. Tomorrow I will look into my brother's eyes and know the truth." The next morning, Chike found himself standing before the tall iron gates of the estate where Emeka lived. The walls were painted white, the kind of clean that looked untouched by dust. Expensive cars drove in and out, guarded by men in uniform with stern faces. Chike felt small, his faded shirt clinging to his thin frame, his cracked sandals whispering against the pavement. He approached the gate cautiously, his heart pounding. "Please, I'm looking for my brother Emeka," he said to the guard. The guard frowned, his eyes scanning Chike from head to toe. "Who are you to him?" "I am his elder brother," Chike replied, his voice steady but low. The guard chuckled, shaking his head. "Do you know how many people come here claiming to be relatives? Oga, no get time for strangers so." Chike's chest tightened. He pulled out the old letters from his bag, waving them desperately. "See," he wrote this. "I sent him to school. I am his brother." The guard's amusement faded. He studied the papers briefly, then sighed. "Wait here, I will ask." Minutes turned into an hour. Chike stood by the gate, sweat rolling down his back as people stared at him like an intruder. At last, the guard returned, his face unreadable. "Oga said he's busy. He cannot see you now. Maybe another time." It felt like thunder splitting Chike's chest. His legs trembled, but he refused to move. "Tell him I will wait here. I came from the village. I will not go until I see him." The guard shook his head. "Suit yourself, old man." And so Chike sat on a stone outside the gleaming estate gate, clutching the letters to his chest. Hours passed. Cars drove in and out. The sun set, painting the sky orange. But Emeka never came. Inside those gates, his brother lived in comfort. Outside, Chike sat in silence, swallowed by the walls of wealth that had shut him out. But deep inside, a fire began to burn. This was no longer about a forgotten promise. It was about dignity. The truth about a brother who must face the man who gave up everything for him. By the second day outside the estate gate, Chike's body ached. His back was sore from sitting on a stone, and his stomach grumbled from hunger, but his spirit refused to bend. Each time the guard asked him to leave, he answered the same way: "I will not go until I see my brother." By evening, curiosity began to stir inside the estate. Some domestic workers whispered about the ragged man at the gate who claimed to be Emeka's elder brother. One maid who pitied Chike snuck him a small loaf of bread and a bottle of water. "Papa, you cannot stay here like this. Oga Emeka does not like to be reminded of the past," she said softly. Chike's heart sank at his words, but he held his ground. The bread only gave him more strength to wait. That night, as the estate glowed with light, Chike caught a glimpse of him. Through the tinted window of a sleek back car that slowed at the gate, Chike saw Emeka's silhouette. The car stopped briefly, and the window rolled down just enough for him to see the familiar face. His brother, older now, well-dressed, with sharp eyes that carried both pride and distance. "Emeka!" Chike cried, stumbling to his feet. He waved the letters desperately. "It's me, your brother Chike. Look at me." But the window rolled back up with cold finality. The car drove past him into the estate, leaving a trail of dust that stung his eyes. The guards laughed under their breath, one of them muttering, "Oga no one know you, old man." Tears filled Chike's eyes, but anger fueled his chest. For the first time, he realized his brother wasn't too busy. He was deliberately hiding behind wealth and walls. That night, Chike whispered to the moonlight sky, "If he refuses to see me, I will tear down these walls with my persistence." By the third day, Chike's patience erupted into boldness. As another car tried to enter the estate, He rushed forward and stood in the driveway, blocking his path. "I will not leave until I see Emeka," he shouted. His voice cracked. The guards rushed at him, dragging him away roughly, but Chike clung to the gate, his fingernails scraping against the iron. "Let me in. He is my brother. Tell him Chike is here." The commotion drew attention. Neighbors and passers-by gathered, curious about the ragged man who was causing a scene at one of the richest estates in the city. Whispers filled the air. "Who is he?" "They say he is Emeka's brother." "Brother? Dressed like that?" Chike's shame was complete, but he refused to stop. He pulled out the old letters once more, holding them high. "This handwriting is his. I gave my youth, my sweat, my future so he could rise. And now he hides from me like I am nothing." Just then, a familiar voice thundered from inside the compound. Emeka himself appeared, flanked by two guards. He wore an expensive shoe, his shoes shining like polished glass. He looked down at Chike with cold eyes that cut deeper than knives. "What is this madness?" Emeka barked, his voice carrying across the crowd. "Why are you here embarrassing me like a beggar?" The crowd gasped. All eyes darted between the wealthy man and the ragged villager at his feet. Chike's heart pounded as he looked into his brother's face, the same boy he once carried on his back to school. His lips trembled, but his voice was steady. "I am here for the truth. I am here for the promise you made and the brotherhood you have forgotten." The street fell into silence. Emeka's face twitched, torn between fury and the weight of the past. The confrontation had begun, and nothing would remain the same after this night. The crowd's murmur grew louder as Emeka and Chike locked eyes. The rich man's polished shoe contrasted sharply with Chike's cracked sandal. Yet, it was clear who held the moral high ground. "Brother," one of the onlookers whispered. He called him brother. Emeka's jaw tightened. He turned to the guards. "Remove him. I don't have time for this nonsense." But before they could act, Chike's voice cut through the night like thunder. "Remove me if you want, but the truth will follow you wherever you go. I gave up my future for yours. I sold my books, my farmland, my very life, so you could wear that suit you are flaunting." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Emeka froze, his composure cracking. Chike stepped closer, lifting the letters with trembling hand. "Do you remember this? You promised. You promised to build us up together. You swore you never forgot where you came from, or me." The weight of his words hung in the air. Emeka's eyes darted to the crowd, who now looked at him with judgment. He tried to laugh, but the sound was hollow. "You don't understand. I had to survive, to fit into this world. If people knew where I came from..." Chike cut him off, his voice rising with passion. "If you deny your roots, you deny yourself. What is wealth worth if it costs you your soul? Look at me, Emeka. I am not ashamed of who I am, but you live in a golden cage, imprisoned by your own pride." For the first time, Chike's face softened. His eyes flickered with grief, a storm raging inside. The crowd leaned in, sensing the walls of silence begin to crumble. Chike's last words struck like a hammer. "I don't want your money. I want my brother back." The silence was heavy, broken only by the chirping of night cricket. Emeka's lips quivered, and suddenly the marks of pride shattered. His eyes welled up with tears that had been buried for years. He staggered forward, his voice breaking. "Chike, my brother." The guards froze in disbelief as Emeka fell on his knees before the man who once carried him on his back to school. The crowd gasped, watching the mighty brought low by love and guilt. "I am sorry," Emeka whispered, clutching Chike's hand with trembling fingers. "I thought wealth would erase the shame of our poverty. I thought forgetting you would make me stronger. But I see now, I am nothing without the man who gave me everything." Chike's own tears flowed freely. He lifted his brother to his feet and embraced him tightly. The letter slipped from his hand, scattering like old memories. Finally at peace. "You are never meant to carry this life alone," Chike muttered. "And neither was I." The crowd erupted in applause, moved by the raw display of brotherhood. Some wept openly, others nodded with respect. That night, at the gates of gold, two brothers reunited, not through wealth, but through truth. Emeka insisted Chike come inside, no longer as a beggar, but as the elder brother he had always been. Within the mansion walls, servants bowed, but Emeka himself carried Chike's bag with trembling humility. "The house is yours as much as mine," he declared. In the weeks that followed, Emeka publicly acknowledged his brother, silencing the whispers of shame. More than that, he began to honor his promise, supporting Chike, helping him rebuild the farm, and even funding the education of children in the village, so that no other elder brother would have to sacrifice everything in silence. Chike, for his part, remained humble. He didn't crave the wealth, he only wanted his brother restored, and in that, he found the greatest treasure of all. The story of the brothers spread far and wide, teaching that true wealth is not measured in riches or estates, but in keeping promises, honoring sacrifices, and never forgetting where you come from. Under the bright city sky, as the brothers sat side by side, Chike whispered, "At last, my journey is complete," and for the first time in many years, his heart was at peace.